We are learning Likkutei Sichot Volume 1, Parshas Noach, page 7 in the Hebrew, section 6. So he says, since the teva, this entering, as the Baal Shem Tov said, into the words of Torah and prayer, is essential to being able to get over the waters of the flood. And as we saw, in our lives, that means the worries from the spirituality and worries from physical matters. So one might come to the conclusion that you should remain locked away in the ark. What would it mean to be locked away in the ark?
Never leave the yeshiva.
Never leave the yeshiva. And this is actually the conclusion that the Litvish Haredi world came to, especially in the land of Israel, but not only. By the way, even if you say that regarding non-Jews, you're a little bit still stuck in the ark. All the more so if you're saying it about other Jews. That I will save myself by being locked away in the ark, in the words of Torah and prayer. I'll lead my life like in a ghetto, disconnected from everything, and I won't care about anybody else. But, says the Rebbe, that this is wrong. So first of all, you start from your family. Because a person could also be locked away. I heard an incredible story a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. This tremendous Talmid Chacham, who would learn all week long. He wouldn't move from his chair. At home, he learned at home. He didn't even go out to a kollel or anything like that. He was at home. And when he passed away, he had written thousands of sheets of chidushim, all kinds of things. And people thought that the children would publish it. But the children said, we can't publish it. I said, why? He says, you don't understand. All week long, our father, from morning from dawn to dusk, right? Or from dawn to dawn even. All he did was, he sat in his chair and he learned and he wrote. And it was a wonderful sight to see. Friday afternoon, he would get ready for Shabbos. An hour before Shabbos, he would close the book. He'd put everything away, and the shouting would begin. And they say for that hour, you saw that the man had not fixed anything in himself. Nothing. Everything was wrong. Everything he shouted about. Everything he yelled about. He was literally violent. He threw things. Because nothing was the way he wanted it to be. He said, we can't. This whole Torah, we don't want it. It's a famous thing from the Baal Shem Tov that he told the Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polana. Polinia, as they say. Polnoi. Polnia. So he told him that on a day in which you get angry, don't write any chidushim. Any kind of anger. It's not shayach. It's not connected to Torah. If you're not calm, you're not in control of yourself. If you don't have a proper connection with those around you, then your Torah is not Torah. It's something else. It's entirely different. In any case, so he says here, it starts from your family. God told Noach, come in with your family, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives. Not only you. It has to include your family and your other children. Who are your other children? Your disciples, your students. So from the family you go out to your students, those that are close to you, and then finally to all of Israel. You have to bring them all into the teva. He's not saying you should all go outside. You should bring them in. They should also be connected to Torah. Because all of Israel are captured, let's say, sorry, not all of Israel, he's talking about all of Israel, and the students are like the children and like the wife. Why? Because a woman, by definition, is the one who receives from her husband. So anyone can receive from me. She's only a symbol for anyone who receives from me. And every Jew should be able to receive from every other Jew. In that sense, we're all married to each other in a certain sense. Okay? Because in the end, all of the Jewish people are one stature. They're one human stature. And all the parts of the body are all connected to all the other parts of the body. את כולם עליך להכניס לתיבה, כלומר עליך להשפיע על כל ישראל להיכנס אל תוך תיבות התורה והתפילה. That you should bring them all into the ark, meaning that you should affect all of the Jewish people to come into the words of Torah and prayer. Now he says, לפני מתן תורה היה מקום לטעות ולחשוב. Before Hashem gave us the Torah, there was room for error. What was the error? מה נוגע לי הזולת? What do I care about someone else? אני את נפשי הצלתי. I saved myself. I am doing the right thing. How does the other person relate to me? I don't care. Still, הנה גם אז אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא לנוח, even back then, Hashem had to say to Noach, אתה ואשתך, כל שכן אחרי מתן תורה, אחרי הערבות שבערבות מואב, שכל ישראל ערבים זה בזה. So if God already said this to Noach before the giving of the Torah, all the more so after the giving of the Torah, and even more so after they received mutual responsibility for one another at the plains of Moab just before they came into the land of Israel. So you can't say, I saved myself. You have responsibility towards everyone. בוודאי שאין אפשרות לצאת ידי חובה בדאגה עצמית, מצבו של הזולת צריך להיות מורגש באמת ובפנימיות הנפש. And certainly there is no way for a person to be yotze, meaning to fulfill his obligation, if he's only worried about himself, if he's only taking care of himself. The status of others, the zulat, tzarich liot mugash, has to be felt, it has to be known to all of us, truly, uvepnimiyut hanefesh. And it has to be felt internally, and something that touches me. Kol Yisrael hem koma achat, the fact that all of Israel are one stature. What does it mean that they're one stature? They're like one body. And all the organs affect one another. The health of one organ depends on the health of other organs. כך גם בקומה שלמה של כנסת ישראל נוגעת לכל יחיד בריאותו הרוחנית של הזולת וכשאינו עוסק עם הזולת חסר גם בו. So, in the stature of the entire congregation of Israel, the health of a single individual affects everyone else. And when one is not engaged with helping others, then there's something lacking in the full stature of the Jewish people. Section 7. Excuse me for a moment. Section 7. השפעה זו על הזולת ובפרט על בני הבית אינה צריכה לעשות כדי לצאת ידי חובה בפרט. The biggest problem is that we do things because we're obligated. So the Rebbe said, do something, so you do it. He says, no, it can't be in order to perform an obligation. אלא יש לעסוק בהתמסרות. Because he said to do it, then I do it. I don't have my heart in it. I'm not thinking about it when I don't need to do it.
Shem told you to do it?
What?
Shem told you to do it?
No, the Rebbe told me to do it. So he says it's not enough. You can't see things this way. If you do things just out of obligation, then the heart is missing. So you can't do things just because I have to do them. It's very interesting because, in general, there's this concept of Kabbalah soul, of taking on Kabbalah soul. This concept means that I take on an obligation. Whether I like to do it or don't like to, I'll do it anyway. So not saying that it's incorrect to do things out of obligation. That's called the default level. In other words, if you can't do it out of commitment, then you should at least do it out of obligation. There has to be Kabbalah soul in it. And truth is, everything has Kabbalah soul. Even when you're doing something out of commitment, there still has to be a dimension of obligation. In other words, you really need both of them. What are these two levels? Every human being has two aspects to him. He has his animal soul and he has his divine soul. The divine soul cannot do things out of obligation. It feels the obligation, it knows about the obligation, but it wasn't meant for the obligation. The divine soul has an affinity to godliness. It touches it. It means something to it. So by the divine soul, it's not taking on the yoke of heaven. It doesn't need to take on the yoke of heaven. It is part of heaven. So for the divine soul, it's like being close to yourself. The divine soul, that's what we mean. That something is a commitment, that it's something that touches you, that means something to you. That's what he calls here hitmasut. The animal soul, that needs the yoke of heaven. That's why it's called the yoke. Because the yoke really is placed on the animal. It's not placed on the divine soul. You don't place the yoke on it. The divine soul wants it anyway, even if you wouldn't put a yoke on it. It is drawn to that anyway. The problem is that in the beginning stages of working, of serving God, you have to use the yoke. Why? Because the animal is the major, has the most prominence. Because it has the most prominence, you have to somehow subject it. You have to bring it under some kind of rule. But the divine soul can never be content with just accepting the yoke of heaven. The divine soul feels that this is me. This is part of me. I'm not taking on some external yoke. כמאמר הידוע, מאדמו"ר הרש"ב, כשם שהנחת תפילין כל יום היא מצווה דאורייתא, על כל יהודי בלי הבדל אם הוא גדול בתורה או איש פשוט, כך גם חוב גמור על כל יהודי לחשוב כל יום חצי שעה לכל הפחות אודות חינוך הילדים. לעשות כל אשר בכוחו ויותר מכפי כוחו, להשפיע על הילדים שהתנהגו בדרך בה מדריכים אותם. It says, Rebbe Rashab is known to have said that just as there's an obligation every day to put tefillin on, there's always an obligation every day to think at least half an hour about my children's education and think about what's happening with them. And he says the main thing here is להשפיע על הילדים שהתנהגו בדרך בה מדריכים אותם. To affect the children, to convince them, to have a positive impact on them so that they follow what they've been taught. Why, of all the mitzvos that he could have chosen, the Rebbe Rashab, when he said this statement, he chose tefillin. הרי ישנן כמה וכמה מצוות, ולמה משתמש דווקא בדוגמה הזו של תפילין? אחד הרמזים בזה הוא מצוות תפילין, אינה מצווה מעשית בלבד, עניינה פנימי שיעבוד הלב והמוח. Because tefillin, we put them on our arm, we put them on our head. They are not just an obligation. If it was just an obligation, what does it matter what you tie up? Tie up your torso. The symbolism, putting it on the hand and putting it on the hand across from the heart. The hand is the extension of the heart. And of putting it on the head means that you're trying to subject the head and the heart. What do you mean to subject? You can't subject the head and the heart by forcing them. That doesn't work. You can say to someone, even you can say to someone, look, if you continue to eat the way you're eating, you're going to drive yourself into the ground. Okay, he heard, he understood. Doesn't hold. Doesn't care. Why? Because the animal soul is stronger. How do you subject the brain? How do you subject the heart? You have to have a lot of explanations. A lot. You have to demonstrate. You have to show. You have to explain. You have to make sure that they don't just understand the message, but that they feel the message. That it's to subject the mind is to corner it. That it can't already understand any other way. There's no other possibility. So if the mind still understands, for instance, when it comes to what you eat, yeah, but this is a long way away. If I don't eat well, I'll still live to 80. It still doesn't matter anything. Doesn't mean anything. The mind wasn't convinced. But if you show him, yes, you'll still live to 80. But the quality of your life from age 50 and on is going to deteriorate terribly. And this is what it's going to look like. And this is what dialysis looks like. And this is what this looks like. And then you're still going to live to 80. But you're going to curse every single day. Why am I alive? You have to convince the mind. You have to talk to it in its language. You can't force it because you can't. The mind is free. It wants to do what it wants to do. But it has to know get all the information. And you have to explain it in such a way. So the point of subjecting the mind and the heart of children is that you have to explain and explain and explain. And if you don't know how to explain, find someone who does. Read in a book how to explain. But there has to be an explanation. Again, the child might not act properly according to what you think he should. But if they understand the explanation, and the explanation makes sense to them, eventually this will affect them. So when he says to think about education, it doesn't mean just which school my child goes to. That's very nice. That you think about, like twice in a lifetime, when they go into grade school and then we go into a yeshiva. The 2 times that you think about this. Or if there's some kind of problem, maybe you have another period of time that you think about this. But the real thinking is, what do I say to my young children? What do I say and what do I do? What do I show them so that it's imprinted on them the right understanding? Again, right means that it jives with their rational mind. If you have some explanation that doesn't make any sense, it's not going to help them very much. They'll remember it for as long as they're afraid of you or that you are inspiring them in some way. But in the end, when they're off on their own, it won't mean anything. The explanation has something that makes sense. ובתניא, וכך גם עניין השפעה על בני, כמו שכתוב בשולחן ערוך ובתניא, וכך גם עניין השפעה על בני הבית צריך להיות לא לצאת ידי חובה בלבד, אלא בשעבוד המוח והלב. So that's what it means to have a commitment, and not to do things just because I'm obligated. To do things just because I'm obligated is because it's true. You can force the heart. You can force the mind. You can force them to act a certain way. You can force them to believe a certain thing. But if you really want to affect them, you have to bring it in language that makes sense and that the person retains because it left an impression on them. And it can't just be because, this is how we do it. Okay, that's an important part. That's what the animal soul needs. But the divine soul, and the divine soul, as it talks to the animal soul, needs an explanation that it can understand. ויהודי שאינו מסתפק בעצמו בלבד, אלא עוסק ומתוך שיעבוד בהצלת יהודים נוספים והבאתם אל תוך התיבה, יכול להיות בטוח גם בעצמו שישאר תמים ושלם. A person who takes the time to work with others, to bring others close to Hashem, bring them close to Torah and prayer, then he has a promise that he's saving other people, then he too will remain whole, safe and sound. And we will end for this week.
I wish you a good Shabbos.
Wish you also a good Shabbos, and we'll see each other on Sunday, God willing, and start Lech Lecha.
Okay, you want a story?
Stuff moves really quickly.
You want a story?
Yeah, we need a story. Quick story.
I just read the story in a book written about Leibel Grona, who was the maskir of the Rebbe. So, the secretary.
It's called the maskir.
Yeah. So he writes in there that there was a couple who lived in Williamsburg from Hungarian origin, and the kid wasn't happy.
You win if you're not Hungarian.
And he wasn't happy in yeshiva. So the father transferred him to a Chabad yeshiva. And when he got into the Chabad yeshiva, he liked it, enjoyed it, went through first grade, second grade, etc., till he came to 18 or 19, and somebody suggested a shidduch for him. So he wrote to the Rebbe and said, this shidduch has been proposed, and should I meet the girl? So the Rebbe said, yeah, it's a good shidduch, you should definitely follow it up. So he then wrote to his parents and said, this shidduch's been proposed, and they wrote back, said the girl's not for you, and she's no good, and she's the wrong family, and she's the wrong this, not enough money, and don't meet her. So he said, but the Rebbe told me to meet her. So he met her. So he met her once or twice, and they decided they wanted to get married. It was, love at first sight, as they say in the comic books. And so he wrote to his parents, he wrote to the Rebbe, got a bracha from the Rebbe to get married, he wrote to his parents, and said, the shidduch is on. So they wrote back and said, if you marry this girl, that's it. We're not your parents anymore. We'd have nothing to do with you. We're not going to come to the wedding. We're not going to pay for the wedding. And you can say to us goodbye. So he said, the Rebbe gave me a bracha, I got a bracha. So one day he's sitting in 770 in the Yeshiva Gedolah learning, and his mother walks into the men's section downstairs, walks straight up to him and gives him a slap right across his face in front of everybody. He said, how dare you do this? You married this girl. Da, da, da. So the Bochum walked up to her and said, listen, he said, instead of slapping your poor son, why don't you go to the person who told him to get married? If you've got a complaint, go to the Rebbe. He says, good idea, I'll go and tell the Rebbe. So she went upstairs to Label, and Label fixed her up an appointment for Yechidus that Thursday night. So of course, when she went into Yechidus with her husband to tell the Rebbe, right?
Tell them off.
Tell him off, chas v'sholem. The whole of the Bachurim was standing outside the door. What's going to be? Right? So after 15 minutes, she comes out with a big smile on her face, and her husband's got a big smile on his face, and the shidduch is on, and we apologize, and it's a wonderful shidduch. So what did the Rebbe say to you? So he says very simple. He said, when the Bacha asked me if she'd go out with this girl, I looked up in all of the books, b'shamayim, that list all the good shidduchim and the bad shidduchim. And I found him listed, and that girl, as a wonderful shidduch. So I told them they should meet. Then when they wrote back again and said that they've met, they like each other, and they want to get married, and I heard that you were opposed, I had to double check. I went back, and I looked at all the books in heaven about all the shidduchim, and I found them there, and there's no one against. So the woman says, if this tzaddik can go up and look at all the books in heaven and tell me what's a good shidduch and what's a bad shidduch, I'm not saying a word, not saying nothing. Leibel said it's one of the very rare times that the Rebbe ever actually said, but he would never say it to a Chabadnik. He only said it to a Hungarian family. You know the story, no? By the way, when Leibel told that story in a Farbrengen in Eretz Yisrael, many years later, one of the people who was listening, an elderly man, said, I was there outside the Rebbe's room when she came out and said it. He actually heard it in Maisa. May Hashem bless you with